Welcome, everybody, to Sweet Home Catoosa. It's been a minute, but glad to be back. We've been working out some things on the back end of Sweet Home Catoosa to try to streamline things, so thank you for your patience. But today, we're privileged again, and it's funny, you were the last guest we had, and now you're a guest again. But today, we've got another, event, coming up with our election, and there's a lot of confusion going on out there. And so what I wanted to tackle today, and it's why I asked you to come on, because you helped with this bill, are these ballot questions. I think one of the things that always got me when my wife and I would go vote, and I hear this from a lot from folks, is we talk about who we're going to vote for in the local elections, but we never really had a heads up or paid attention to the ballot questions.
Yes.
And so we show up and then we leave out of there and we look at each other like, what did you think about that? Or how did you vote on that? And I just think that always stuck at me a little bit, because if we're going to vote on things that are really important, and these are very important things, especially the first one we're going to tackle today, we need to have some education out there ahead of time, right? Because we don't want to miss the chance. And my wife was the first one that said, if I get something and I read it and it's confusing, I just vote no. And it's like, wow, we miss opportunity sometimes for folks that just like, if I can't understand it, I'm just going to vote against it because I don't want to mess up and vote the wrong way. So we're going to jump right in, because on the sample ballot, and we'll have this here, the first question says, proposed constitutional amendments. 1, provides for a general law statewide homestead exemption that may differentiate among political subdivisions. Then it says House Resolution 1022. And then it goes on to cite the page and the year. It says, shall the Constitution of Georgia be amended so as to authorize the General Assembly to provide by general law for a statewide homestead exemption that serves to limit the increases in the assessed values of homesteads, but which any county, consolidated government, municipality, or local school system may opt out of upon the completion of certain procedures. You vote yes or no on that. So that's where we're going to start, because that one right there kind of falls right into the line of the last episode we did, which was dealing with what? Taxes, school board tax, things like that. So Mitchell, let's start out with it and kind of walk through real slow. You were on UCTV the other night, and we were watching you, and my wife looked over at one point and said, I'm confused, right?
Absolutely.
Because there's so much to this.
Yes, there is.
And so I think we're going to try to slow it down and kind of take it a little bit higher up and not get so much stuck in the weeds today, to explain to folks why this is something that you worked on and why you think this is a good thing. And we'll talk about all the things inside of there. And there are some good things to this. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let you kind of walk us through how it started.
Absolutely. Well, first, thank you for having me today, Richard.
You're welcome.
The podcast is an excellent way to reach your constituents. So I thank you for allowing that avenue to go around and, yes, educate and address the issues that we saw in session, that we've seen for years, that kind of correlated to this bill, and to where we can kind of walk forward and help our constituents with, and it's a balancing problem. And
Sure.
So it is a very complicated bill, because we're trying to balance a lot of different problems that are all starting to correlate at the same time. And so that's why we're taking it, just like you said, step by step. And so if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to stop me. And so first, let's address House Resolution 1022. So because of how state law is, to put something on the state constitution as a ballot question, you have to have it as a resolution.
Okay.
But you also have to have a separate bill to define what you're putting as a resolution to the people. And so that's why a lot of people are confused with saying House Resolution 1022. Is that the same thing as House Bill 581?
So is it the same?
So many people were wondering if 1022 and 581 was the same. It is the same exact bill. How the House process works, you have to have a resolution on the House side for a constitutional ballot, and then the House bill goes into effect once you authorize us to have that authority. And so the House Bill 581 passed this legislative session, and it has to deal primarily with what we've been talking about last couple of weeks ago, which was the massive tax increases that we're seeing locally, an increase of 28% that was due to a whole lot of different factors.
Correct.
So to kind of start the story and how it all kind of began this way, a couple of years ago when I ran on a very simple platform. I want to fight for change to keep what we have. My children grew up in this school system, and I mean, I grew up in this county, and I love this county. I want my kids to experience the same county I experienced. And so I began looking at the books of the different county and Board of Education and saying, I think we do have an issue coming up because our revenues aren't keeping up with our expenses. And so that was due to, again, a whole lot of different issues: federal funding, state funding, and local funding, and how we were managing our local funds and local property value increases. And so we started delving down into the issues. I spoke with the superintendent last year, right before the last tax increase, and we began talking about what can be some of the solutions, what are some of the things that we can protect from. And so property taxes and sales taxes were the major question. I'm a big believer in sales taxes over property taxes because property taxes are a tax of rent. They don't grow accordingly to like the economy grows. They grow at about 2 to 3% a year. They are very heavily bureaucratic and very heavily, the checks and balances are very heavily regulated. And it's, as we've seen the last 2 years, it's a very complicated process that causes a lot of log jams yearly that kind of all spiral into these last giant increases of 20% and now 30% of your value increasing so fast. And so we began seeing this problem start escalating early last year, and we were like, okay, how do we want to address this? And so I sat down with the county commissioners, I sat down with the Board of Education and through the superintendent, and we talked about different ways we can address this. And something I would love to see long-term is us leaving property taxes altogether because of these problems and move to a sales tax base. But that just doesn't happen overnight, of course.
Yeah, and there's a lot of pushback on it. So on the way that when they look at the ballot, what that means to the layman's terms is we, the state, if this goes through January 1st, if this is approved, if it passes 51 to 49, if it passes, then starting January 1st, there'll be a different way that your home is assessed if it's your primary residence.
Yes, sir.
That you get to have a homestead exemption on.
Well, it's still assessed the same way. All you're doing is adding a homestead exemption on top of it. So as we saw this 20% increase, this last 30% increase, we want to protect the homeowner from these massive increases and provide some stabilization of the market. And so I spoke with Chairman Blackman saying we had these issues coming up. And he's like, we're very interested in bill ideas, and we're talking about a sales tax approach. I'm like, this is great. We really hit it off, and we were heading in that direction. And then the state Senate wanted to do something on exemptions and on property and on how we assess property and all of these different. And I thought if we started getting into that, you're getting way into the weeds, as you see, and it becomes a very convoluted and complicated shuttle.
Sure.
Because I think it's, again, better to move towards a sales tax policy than just focus on property tax because of this heavy bureaucratic load. And so through a lot of negotiation, we devised House Bill 581. And we got mostly what we wanted, but it came with some strings to provide balance on that property tax side. So most specifically, what are we voting on come November? You're voting on the authority for the House to put for the legislature and the state government to put this immediately on the books come January 1st. And so what immediately goes on the books in January 1st? That is a homestead exemption to where right now your house is valued, let's say $200,000.
Correct.
And it just increased to $200,000 from $150,000, a massive, that massive jump.
Last 2 years, it went up basically 50%, right?
Yep. And so now it's stuck at it's according to the market, because we did that last week.
Sure.
Of showing how it's still underneath the market on average, about 10%. Yes, there are those houses that are higher than normal, and there are those houses way lower than normal, but median, they're still lower than that market value. And so let's say your house now is valued at $200,000.
$200,000 come January 1.
Yes.
This goes into effect. We vote this in.
Yes. And so your house now value is stuck at $200,000 and can only go up with inflation. So this is where it gets very into the weeds. So first you have your assessed value. Your assessed value will still go up naturally, depending on however the tax assessor chooses to assess your property.
Correct.
Through all the sorts of different regulations that
they're still going to do the assessment based on what the market says the house is worth.
Exactly. So your assessed value will still go up to, let's say, $250,000.
Okay.
But it can only go up. But your taxable rate for your home can only now go up with inflation.
So what's inflation for most folks? So, let's throw some real percentage out there. So last 2 years, we said we saw a 20 and we saw a 30% increase. And so now you say, okay, if we vote for this, come January 1, they're saying my house is worth 200,000.
Yes.
And you're saying they can't come back next year and assess my home for, let's just say it's not a big a year and it's only 10%. And so now they say, Mr. Tharp, your home's worth 220,000. But this, if we put this in, says we're not going to let you pay your property taxes on your homestead, your house, on 210,000. We're going to go back and look and see what inflation was. So what is average inflation percentage-wise?
Absolutely.
A year.
Depending on the Fed, of course.
Correct.
Because of all their, again, it's Fed rates. On average, before the last recent 3-year jump that we've seen, it's been 3-4% a year.
Okay.
Now recently it's been a lot more. It's been and so first we have to ask who decides these, because I've heard that question a lot. So
who decides what that number is going to be?
When do they decide it? So how it's decided is every year, once a year, Georgia Economic Research Office will use a estimated inflation rate. And I've already spoken with their office. They're just going to basically take what the feds say is their yearly average inflation rate. And that's going to be their basis for this new homestead exemption. And so let's say just the average inflation rate according to the feds is 3%.
Let's just say 3, right?
Yeah, make it easy math for us.
So in my example, they said, Mr. Tharp, your house is worth 210,000 now.
And it'll
went
still
up
say that on your bill.
And it'll still say that. But Mr. Tharp, since this floating homestead exemption is in, we took inflation, and inflation was only 3%. So we're only going to tax you on 203,000. In other words, you're getting a $7,000 exemption based off this bill that you voted on. So that's where the exemption comes in. If we'd have passed and done this 3 years ago, that 50% would have been way higher than what inflation was, because inflation wasn't anywhere near 50% the last 2 years. So you will be guaranteed on your primary homestead exempted house a lower property tax, because this exemption will help you to have a lower property tax. And so that's what this bill is designed to do.
Yes, sir.
This keeps it at 3%, 3%, 3%, and it'll fluctuate a little bit, but it never goes 3 to 30%. Inflation never does that. It could be 2, 2.25, 3, 3.25, 4, back to 2.
That you see is, again, just the last 3 years, you've seen it go from 3% to 7%. But,
correct.
But again, it's a cap. It's not. So if yours falls underneath that value, or because what if house values go down? Firstly, I don't think that's going to happen in a major way.
That's a great question that's been asked too. So I'm not locked into that 203. If the following year we hit a bad recession and they come back and assess my value at 185, well, I'll still be trapped at 203 because of that floating homestead exemption. And the answer to that is
no. It's just
you'll be back to the 185.
It goes back down and floats below that.
Very
all
good.
This is doing is basically saying they cannot tax you more than what you've paid for the house plus inflation.
It puts a ceiling on your tax bill, but it doesn't provide a floor. In other words, if your house value goes back, this will go back, your taxes. But instead of the last 3 years where you've seen a 20 or 30, you might have saw a 7% inflation rate instead of 30% in the jump.
Exactly.
So you would have had 23% that you would have got a floating homestead exemption and not paid tax on that value.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it protects your value going up so quickly on your home, and it protects you from losing your home because of those low-income individuals that can't pay a 20, 30% increase in 1 year.
Okay.
And a perfect example is senior citizens. They're fixed on Social Security. That's stuck at an inflation rate based on the feds of, let's say, I think their rate of increase was like 6-7% this year. So if your property tax goes up 20%, you slowly can't afford that.
Right.
And so it protects those low income individuals, and it protects our seniors, and it protects our homeowners most specifically.
That's the first thing folks want to know. What's the benefit? What does this do for me? I understand all this, and I understand how you guys got the bill done, but at the end of the day, what's it do for me? And that is simple in the fact that it controls the elevating of your home value where it doesn't have like the last couple of years where it's
Exactly.
such a big swing.
And that was the whole point of that first point of the and that's the first balance, right? To protect our homeowners.
Correct.
That's what we wanted to do in that portion of the bill. So let's go to the next balancing point, which is, okay, well, where is the negatives of this new tax exemption?
Correct.
Now, that would be on local government because now they're not getting this tax revenue from that difference, right? For the homeowners. But so we're like, okay, where's that balance that can come into effect, right? So first, the citizens get a vote and say, yes, we're giving you the authority. Well, next, it will go to your local authorities to decide if they want to keep this exemption on their books. We gave them a capability of opting out, and that was written in that language that they had that capability of opting out come January 1st to March 1st, 60 days to say, well, we're going to hold 3 hearings. It's just like a tax increase. They have to provide public notice.
Because in essence, it would be a tax increase if they opt out.
Yes.
So the agencies are the county government, the county commission, the 2 cities of Ringgold, Fort Oglethorpe, and the school board.
Yes, sir.
Those are the 4 taxing authorities. So those 4 authorities independently have to say, I want to stay in and take this. The citizens voted for it.
Required basically to say, no, we don't want this.
And so if they say, no, we want to opt out, they have to have 3 public hearings because it said, in essence, would be a tax increase because that cap wouldn't be put on there. And now they have to explain why
Exactly.
they want to opt out.
And so let's talk about the pros and cons of that choice, right? So first, it's not taking away any current revenue because I'm hearing that a lot from different kinds. It's taking our revenue. It's not taking away any current revenue because this is based on future value, right? So it is taking away future revenue.
Correct.
But if they always chose to take the rollback or choose in some way to take a rollback, then because that rollback rate's lower than that exemption rate, you're not going to see a major shift in revenue changes, right? So example is this just affects homes. So if your values on the businesses, on the of rental properties, of any other properties,
Non-exempt properties.
non-exempt properties, they're still going to go up that whatever increase the appraisals are. So going back to
Correct.
example, 10%. So they're going to see a massive jump in their assessments of 10%. And so like the normal process, they'll have to decide, do we want to take the rollback or do we want to take a tax increase according to the Taxpayer Bill of Rights
to offset what we may be giving to the exempt folks over here. So yeah, that's the negative is some folks say, well, hey, it just shifts. It really doesn't get rid of a tax. It just shifts the burden from the exempt folks over here to the non-exempt folks, which would be rental houses or commercial properties and all that.
Well, that's only if you increase the taxation rate.
If you do.
If you do. And so that's but again, we're talking about increased revenues in the future. So as long as we operate at the current budgetary rate or with knowing that this is now in place, again, going back to our proper planning conversation,
Sure.
that, okay, so what's this going to kind of look like in our future planning? Because there's no reason whatsoever you cannot properly plan this and say, okay, well, we see this growing and we can take a little bit of growth out, and that's all it's doing. Instead of them being able to always grow at this, 100% of the pie, and they're now having to take a little sliver of the pie out and protect our homeowners.
Well, I think here's my thing about it is I think it's great for homeowners that have homestead exemption, right? You can plan for this. You're only going to increase a small amount every year. You won't see the big increases that we've seen the last few years. The negative to that is if you look down the road, say 15 years, and you look at home values, somebody who buys a $200,000 house today, in 15 years, the assessed value of that home will be more than what they're actually paying tax on because they're only going to go up by inflation, but the value of that home is going to outpace inflation. It always has. And so what they're saying is by the end of that 15 years, that house may actually be valued by the assessor at $350, but they may only be paying taxes on $250 because of the way they got capped. So there's a $100,000 gap there on all those homestead exempt properties that aren't paying that tax anymore, that shifts that burden over to the county government still has to operate and run off the certain revenues that they have because inflation will continue on. So what our budget is today won't be the same as it is in 15 years. If you look at the county government 15 years ago, they were not operating on the same dollars they are today. And so that's the concern people have. Now, if you're a homestead and you own your house and you don't own any rental property, you have no commercial property, then hey, you know, there's nothing in your way to worry about, right? Because you benefit the whole way through. And that benefits the citizens of Catoosa County that stay here and plant their roots.
And yes, and it absolutely protects the current constituents. It protects those that want to stay and build the roots in Catoosa County. Also, in my opinion, what it protects is protection from growth of government. I'm a constitutional Republican. I'm a conservative.
I get it. I'm a Republican conservative too. So yes, it puts the earnest back on us to make sure we plan ahead for that 15 years by saying we need to be smarter with this money, because we know every year it's going to get a little harder because we're going to have a little less revenue. Or we got to increase taxes over here on the non-exempt and commercial, which just isn't really fair.
Yes, and then everybody's like, well, how do we know it's growing government or not growing government? And it depends on your definition of what growing government is. So I'll explain what my position is. My position is government's operating right now at a current amount. And then there is at a current amount. Well, next year, you're exactly right. There will be inflationary, like we talked about last time, that cost of the cane is going to go up next year.
Sure.
3%, because inflation is just a calculation of all the prices increasing for a year.
And employees want raises, and we've got all these employees at the county and everything. And so everybody, there's always more, right? For good reason.
Exactly. Well, if we protect, your expenditures plus inflation, which this bill does, it protects the value plus inflation, then you're going to see the same amount of taxes protecting you from growing your government for the property owner.
I get, yep.
And so it holds it at the same rate of your government being the same size. And so that, again, yes, it does create that restraint on local governments from saying, well, we can't grow at a faster rate than inflation unless we raise the millage rate.
Correct.
And so that's where a lot of local governments are saying, well, it is affecting our people.
It's a challenge down the road.
If you grow more than inflation.
Correct. It's a challenge down the road potentially because, like I said, the exemptions are going to outpace the real values of the home. But it's good for the homeowner.
Yeah. And then let's talk about also, like you were saying, the future people who buy their home in this area. Well, kind of like our conversation last time, it's very hard to assess that property that's not on the market, because not only are you basing on the average of what the market says now, but markets fluctuate.
Correct.
I mean, you're in residential property, you know how quickly all prices fluctuate across different years and different boards, and when you buy in and when you don't. And so we're just basically providing you to keep the same value in your house that the market at the time deemed was that value of what you bought. And so that's why I like sales taxes versus property taxes. And when I go buy a pen at the store, pen prices fluctuate. Say a ton of pens hit the market, right? And pen prices down. Well, I'm like, okay, I'll buy 3 of them.
Sure.
And so then it goes up. I'm like, good thing I bought, because it saved me from the sales tax, and I was able to plan ahead. This is kind of does the same thing. It protects the property from sales. But yes, so it can hurt your local government if they're not properly planning, and if you're growing more than inflation. And so that's why, but let's remember the balances. So the first balance was protecting the homeowner. The second balance is, well, now can the local governments do something about if they think it hurts them too much?
Well, and so that's where the second part is, and that's where I was about to go. So if this passes, folks say, yes, I want to have a cap on how much I can have put on my home, my homestead exempt home, every year on my tax. These big swings, 20, 30%, I want to see those go away. I like this 3 to 4 to whatever it may be, 7 in a bad year. That's better. All right. They vote this in. So now there's the option to go and have a referendum for a 1 penny.
Okay. So yeah, so now it's in the counties, right? So the first balance was the homeowners, like, we no longer want this 20, 30% increase. That's the ballot question.
And they pass that.
And they pass it because it's an exemption. Most likely it will pass.
So now it goes to the county and city governments and the school board come January 1 to decide.
And they get to decide now on all these different factors that start coming into play. So first, that immediately goes on the books, that exemption, and property owner has it. Well, now the cities and the county, because the school board's a separate entity. So remember, 2/3 of your taxes go to your school board. That's a whole separate entity. Now we can look at county and city governments. And again, up here, I prefer sales tax over property taxes. Catoosa County is very lucky because our sales taxes bring in almost 3 times what the local counties around us bring in because we're such a retail market. And because we have lower sales taxes across the board than Walker, Whitfield, and Hamilton County, even with an additional penny if we chose to go that route. And so let's talk about the additional penny. So take your school taxes and to the side. I wanted to try to find a way that we could offset property taxes with that sales tax. And that was my whole focus last legislative session. And so that's where the creation of what's called a FLOST, the flexible penny option sales tax, to offset property taxes come into play. And so if the county and the two cities choose to keep this exemption, they are now eligible for a 1 penny sales tax to offset all property taxes in Catoosa County. I believe with proper budget management and doing it properly over 2 to 5 years of having a FLOST, you could completely offset all county and city property taxes with a 1% sales tax. The cities would almost immediately be completely offset, but the county would probably take 2 to 5 years, and that's where you'd see that. And so say I'm a property owner, and not only do I have now this floating homestead exemption, but the floating homestead exemption, you also have so be clear, the homestead exemption doesn't cut your taxes. It just protects you from having these massive increases in the future.
Correct.
That's where the FLOST comes in. The FLOST can protect and can lower your property taxes because we're offsetting your taxes to a sales tax. And in Catoosa County, I did the math earlier, on the average homeowner for a $285,000 house for county and city property taxes are paying anywhere from $650 to $450. If we increase the penny sales tax, everybody would be paying most likely probably an additional $300 to $350 on their expenses. So for Catoosa County residents, that's a clear win of almost $150 to $300 depending on that year. And so that's what we're trying to do is shift the burden on all this retail market because people are driving on the roads, they're outside the county users are using our infrastructure and our resources, and it benefits and it puts the focus from you guys from building property and putting property out there to building up our retail markets and building up our sales markets because of those additional revenues. And the sales tax revenue keeps up at a faster pace, like I was saying earlier. And so basically what this does, this FLOST allows us to do is offset all county and city property taxes with a 1 penny sales tax. And that was my end goal. And so we got that on the ballot. And so now it's up to the cities and the county to decide, okay, we can do that. And so going back to that third balance. So we protected the homeowners. We gave them say we don't want to deal with any of this. So an opt-out period. Lastly, we gave them an ability to raise, to have the same amount of money and grow faster than before and protect all property owners. Because basically on a county roll, it completely offsets even this homestead exemption. So you'll be growing, your revenue will be growing at a faster pace than y'all don't even have to worry about the homestead exemption because y'all aren't worried about property taxes because it's completely offsetting 1 for 1.
Okay. So back up. November, you're going to go vote.
Yes.
If you vote yes, and the majority of the citizens vote yes on this, then the homestead exemption, floating homestead exemption, will go into effect January 1. Now, the cities, the county, and the school board have the ability to opt out. If, for the sake of the argument, they say, hey, the citizens by a large number want this relief on their tax bill, so we're not going to opt out, the 2 cities and the county. At that point, it triggers where they can now put on a ballot and the citizens vote to have a 1 cent sales tax. So we would go from 7 cents to 8 cents in the sales tax. And that referendum would be more than likely on a March ballot like it was this year. Absolutely. With FLOST.
So let's talk about that process of how that would go into effect.
Because I want folks to understand is you vote yes here. The next step is, are the cities going to stay in the county? If that happens, the next step to this in getting you more relief on your tax bill is you will vote to add another penny to your sales tax. And then Mitchell's explaining where that penny is going to go. So it all goes into pot but you take it. But that's where I wanted folks to understand the process here.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that last process. So yes, November, you're voting just on the homestead exemption.
Correct.
Then the counties, cities, and Board of Education decide we want this exemption on our books. I would highly suggest y'all doing that because I think it will pass in Catoosa County, and that way the voice of the people was heard.
Well, you know, and that's real quick on that. You know, when you were on the show the other night, Mr. Ward's a frequent caller on UCTV on the night show and the morning show, and I always value his comments because he's very, he reads up on everything. And he said, it would be hard for me to understand how the people would vote on this and then the county governments or city governments to come back and say, we're going to opt out of this, even though you, the citizens, want this. And that's really struck a chord with me because it's like, well, he's right. I mean, if the people were wanting it and for the cities and the counties to opt out, that's
it would go very contrary to
yeah, it would.
what they just said.
So Mr. Ward did a good job pointing out a very, very good question there. So
absolutely. And I think that's a fair way of looking at it. Now you could look at it as a different way, to be fair as well, saying you're just authorizing us to have this bill and then it goes to you guys to decide. But again, I take Mr. Ward's opinion, I take your opinion, which is I do believe that you'd be kind of taking back the vote.
You're taking away the vote of the citizens. The citizens said yes, and we're like, yeah, you just don't really understand this the way we do, and so we're going to opt out.
This is a statewide referendum. So say Fulton County says we don't want this, so they vote no countywide, and those cities and that county can say we don't want this, and they can opt out. And so it goes to each, again, jurisdiction, county to see how people voted, why they voted this way. Talk to your constituents.
Sure.
It's all about communication. That's why I'm trying to do this consistently.
But Walker County could vote against this, and we vote for it,
exactly,
and we get it. It's not something that has to go statewide. A majority want it.
The majority.
It's county. Every county decides. Oh, correct.
On November ballot.
On
the whole state decides. It's up to the whole state ballot because you're authorizing the state constitution to have this power.
So in Catoosa, if we voted 74-30 against. But statewide, they voted 54 against and 46 for. We wouldn't have it.
We wouldn't have it. We wouldn't have it at all.
That's good information to know,
all
too.
You're doing is authorizing us to have this power.
So it's got to be a statewide yes.
Yeah.
It's not just what we want Catoosa. If we want it, that's great. But statewide, it has to pass.
Yes. And let's look at the opposite. Say Catoosa County votes it down and the rest of the state votes it for.
Correct.
Then y'all have the authority to say, well, we want to opt out on this.
Because the citizens said they don't want it.
Yeah.
And so we have that ability now to say, we're going to honor your vote and we'll opt out.
Exactly.
So very good.
So I think that's a fair way to look at that opt out.
Sure.
But we also, as a state, wanted to basically provide you guys a way of saying, this is how our constituents are looking at it. This is how I'm looking at it. This is what I see because y'all are leaders in the community. So we wanted to make sure we gave y'all that fair vote and saying we want to opt out.
It's a statewide problem, though. It's not a Catoosa problem with values jumping up as well.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I would think statewide, it's probably got a better chance of not passing.
Absolutely.
So it passes and we don't opt out. So here we go. We're going to go to the 1 cent sales tax vote in March. And let's say the citizens vote for that.
Well, let's talk about that process. So November, yes. In January to March 1st, y'all decide not to opt out. It's immediately on your books. Y'all don't have to do anything else.
Okay.
Now, if y'all decide to have a FLOST, because again, that's a whole set. It's two bills stuck in one because that's how the negotiations worked and how House and Senate legislative process works right now.
I understand, but that's where it is. So it goes in. So let's walk us through that.
So it goes in. So now the counties and the cities negotiate a certain percentage.
Correct.
Of how much the cities want and how much the county wants. And this is because we also wanted a fair negotiating power between the cities and the counties to say, this is how it is. So if the cities if one city chooses to opt out, y'all are not eligible for floating, for the FLOST.
Correct. Yeah. So if it passes on this ballot statewide and one city says no, one city says yes, and the county says yes, but that one city saying no, it's done.
And a lot of people were like, well, how is it going to work if one section opts out and another section doesn't? Well, if one section's opt out, that doesn't affect your personal county budget.
This will still be here, though, correct?
Yes.
If one city opts out,
yours will still be in place.
The exemption for everybody will still be in place
for the county or for the other city, but not for
this city.
But if that city decides to opt out, they don't have that floating homestead.
So their citizens will still take the wild fluctuations if they happen.
Exactly.
Okay.
And
but to get to the 1 cent sales tax, all three have to stay in.
Yes.
Okay.
And so, real quick, I'm going to clear that up too, of where again, going back to opt out, it's like, well, it wouldn't be messed. We already have a lot of different exemptions. Fort Oglethorpe has a lot more exemptions than Ringgold has exemptions. the county has different exemptions and both the cities have exemptions. So this is nothing new of one county having a different exemption than the city.
Correct.
It's
Correct.
just how your citizens are running and you listening to your constituents, but also negotiation of that 1% sales tax. And so now going back to negotiation and protecting, now all three of you have not only a voice of that, but of the 1% sales tax. So you are negotiating. Well, the minimum each of the cities can get under law is the 15 and 5 is the population difference. Sorry. So Fort Oglethorpe is roughly 15% of the population. Ringgold is 5% of the population. So the county could get up to 80% of the sales tax revenue.
So let's just say that's the way they sit down at the table and they say county gets 80, they get 15 down to Fort Oglethorpe and Ringgold takes 5. So let's just say for
Absolutely.
easy thing here for the viewers to follow, everybody agrees on that. So now it's agreed.
Exactly. So it's agreed. I've ran the numbers personally. I've sent the numbers to the county and to the cities to see if there's any difference in their numbers. I hadn't heard anything back. But if that kind of equation went into effect, you'd have no city property taxes on overnight. And then on the county side, it would still take a couple years to completely go to zero. But you could with the rate our growing economy is growing in Catoosa County.
So the 1 cent gets paid on everything everybody buys in Catoosa County.
Yes.
It's collected by the Georgia Department of Revenue, and then they send back, based off of what we decided the split was, that revenue to those cities and to the county. And that money can only go and has to be applied to your property tax bill. That penny can't go anywhere else or be used for anything else.
And that's where a lot of people are confused. This is all property taxes. This is commercial property taxes, rental property taxes, and your residential property
I was confused on that because this, when you vote on the ballot, is for just homestead exempt properties.
Yes.
So if you vote on this and it goes through, only the folks who homestead their primary residence will see that relief.
Yep.
Okay. But the penny sales tax will go to everybody, commercial, non-exempt, and exempt folks all alike. The 1 penny will go towards everybody's tax bill.
Exactly.
That's good information to know.
And especially on the commercial side, I mean, as you know, commercial property increased massively.
100%. I saw that. Absolutely. I saw 4 million go to 8 million in 1 year.
And so people are like, where does that you have to find a way to pay for that property increase as well. So you're putting that on your prices.
Sure.
And so it's hurting your competition because your prices are increasing. So regardless, you're still having to find a way to pay for those property taxes through your market value. And so I think if we go to this value, suddenly you're now capable of lowering your prices. Yeah, you have a 1% sales tax net. We're going from 7 to 8. We're still the lowest around.
We're lower than Hamilton and would be equal to Walker, correct? Yeah. So we wouldn't be lower anymore, but we wouldn't be higher than our neighboring Walker County and would still be lower than Hamilton.
Exactly.
So like Costco, blessed we are to have it in Catoosa County. You know, folks, still paying less in sales tax than they would if it had resided in Hamilton County.
But I believe we can see that offset also in our market prices because no longer are you having to pay such massive bills for your commercial property taxes.
So the 1 cent tax. Okay. So
I think that's a fair balance. So that's what we want to do is create, again, that 3 balance wheel, protecting homeowners, protecting local counties and municipalities and authorities. And then lastly, lowering property taxes and moving to a sales tax base. And so that's what this bill allows us to do is slowly, methodically, and with everybody's input, a balance of equation to move us into that kind of avenue. And I think it was a very good way of balancing it all and everybody's concerns statewide because, again, this is a statewide bill. So that's why so many different things came into play to do it that way.
I think, listen, there's so much more than we're talking about today with this, but I'm trying to keep it simple, folks, just to understand the basics of this bill and the benefits of it. Sure, there's things that other folks are going to look at and think, ooh, that down the road we may be in a little bit of trouble. But, for the folks that want to, and that's the average citizen out there, right? I live in a home and man, my property tax bills have just gotten crazy. This will control a portion of it. Obviously, like the 1 cent, that wouldn't go towards your school tax, and the school controls the majority of your bill.
Yep.
And if the school decides to opt out of that, then they can continue to levy their tax at whatever rate they decide. So, the 1 cent can only go toward your city and county. So like for me here, I live in the county. it would only go toward that portion of my bill as well. And so what they do is they collect all that revenue and then they decide. So there's a few things I do like about this bill too I want to talk about is one, and this is something that's been exploited statewide and it's really happened in metro areas. So if you appeal, and more folks really got in on that this year. So if you appeal your tax assessment, the way it is set up now, whether you win or lose your appeal, it freezes your value of your home for 3 years. And so what was found out was there was large corporations that had a lot of rental properties and things like that in metro parts of the state, especially.
Even in rural parts of the state, we were seeing that.
Sure. And so what they knew is they gamed the system. So let's say your house was $200,000 and they've got 100 $200,000 homes. They knew if they appealed it, that it froze that $200,000 value for 3 years. Well, you know, if it went up to 220 and then 240 the following year, they were still only paying tax on 200,000. Third year comes along, it's 260 now. So, okay, fine, it's 260, but I appeal it again and freeze it for 3 more years. So in essence, what they're doing is they're only paying fair tax 1 year out of 3,
Exactly.
Right? And so with this bill, if it passes, one of the things I liked about it was you still have the right to appeal, but you only get a freeze if you win your appeal.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was a very good thing. It kind of takes the gaming of the system by large corporations or anybody else out of the system, and it puts more of a fair tax on the table where that takes some of the burden off too for folks that have been gaming the system and paying a little less tax and put it off on the burden of the average homeowner in the county. So I like that part of the bill. That was one of the things I liked about it. And the second one I liked was we get the scare letter, as I call it. Everybody got it this year, right? And it says, hey, here's what your property taxes are going to be based off the assessment of your home. And as we saw this year, we had a large increase, 30% in the value of your home. And so folks got this number, what their tax says it would potentially be. And they thought, oh my gosh, my taxes went up $700. Well, that wasn't a real thing because, you know, like the county took a full rollback. So you didn't realize that. So going forward, that number goes away on your bill. The fictitious number, so to speak, goes away. The scare number, as I call it. And I think that's a good thing because it created a lot of confusion and anger in the community because the counties, the cities, and the school board hadn't decided yet what they were going to do on the rollback. So like Ringgold rolled it back. The county rolled it back. The school board didn't. They rolled a little bit, but they didn't take a full rollback. But that scare letter, nobody's paying that. So I like that being taken away from there. Those are two positives.
I go to the county commissioner meetings as much as I can, depending on my schedule, and just to know what's going on in the county and to see what you guys are doing so I can do my best to help you guys and vice versa. Now, that being said, that was a lot of complaints from the county commissioners when they were doing their budgets. People are scared to death about this letter, and we're going to take the rollback. And so there needed to be a balance to where you still got the letter because you need to prepare.
Correct.
They don't. And at the same time, the schools still did their 28% increase, and that's 66% of your bill. And so, it went down, but didn't go down that whole amount. So then there needed to be some middle ground. So I think that's a fair middle ground to alleviate the complaints of the commissioners, but at the same time provide the people with something that they can plan on.
They are. I think they're going to get now, instead of that number, they're going to get a millage rate, which still is a little confusing because most folks, a millage rate, what is a millage rate and what does that mean to me? Bottom line, I'm looking at it going, okay, this is what the projected millage rate will be, but does that mean my taxes are going to go up, stay the same? What's it going to be? So I don't think it's totally fixed, but the scare number went away, and I like that part of the bill. Mitchell, what else do we need to talk about with this one? I mean, I know we can get in the weeds, but I wanted to get the basic information out there to folks.
Absolutely.
So what are we missing that really folks need to understand about this?
So real quick, again, in November, all you're voting on is the authority to have these on the books January 1st. January 1st, then your local authorities can decide, look at how you voted, and decide how they're going to vote. And if they decide to opt out, it's like a tax increase. They have to go through those hearings. Come March 1st, it's immediately on the books regardless if they keep it. Then a whole separate process is that 1% sales tax. You're not voting on that 1% sales tax right now. That votes in the future, depending on how things go and how negotiations go and how we put it on the ballot. And there are checks and balances because people are like, and fairly so, well, we just had a SPLOST and our property taxes just increased. And people don't know the differences between the jurisdictions.
Correct.
And so they feel like the rule was covered,
they were lied to, right? And this is what I get from folks. Listen, I was told in March, if I vote for SPLOST and I keep this penny sales tax, it'll protect me from having an increase on my property taxes. And little did we know, we were fixing to take one of the larger increases that we've seen in a while. So I think the citizens are going to be a little leery of this new 1 cent sales tax because they're like, look, we were told SPLOST would eliminate or secure us from having an increase, and we got it anyway. Yeah. But I think there's misinformation as far as what SPLOST can do, and SPLOST doesn't help the school system.
It doesn't help the school system.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. There's two separate jurisdictions.
So the two agencies that SPLOST did help, when you voted to keep that penny in March, it helped the cities and it helped the county, correct?
Yeah, they took the rollback.
And they both took a full rollback on their taxes this year, on the property taxes. Yeah. So it did help your bill. I know you don't think it did, but it did help your bill because where you put that penny, they did not raise your taxes.
Going forward as well, this 1 penny will help that side of that equation, but the school system's a whole different side of that equation.
Correct.
And we can get that in a second. But on that side of the equation, we now have this future option to offset that bill complete with that 1% sales tax. And again, I'm a fiscal conservative Republican. I want you to have lower taxes. I believe to do that, you have to be very fiscally responsible with your budgets and lower it over time, or have different ways of revenue that lower your taxes. And so I look at the data and I say, if we pass this bill, is your personal tax rate going to be lower? And I think, and again, I'm for fair taxes. So if we spread it across everybody, yes, your personal tax is lower and it's fair to everybody. That's why I'm for sales taxes versus not property taxes. And so I think that bill achieves that specific thing. And if, let's say, Richard's getting in and y'all pass a FLOST and y'all say, we're offsetting property taxes. Well, then you're like, well, I really want to do this pet project. So I'm going to raise the millage rate a little bit and slowly, it's not offset anymore.
Correct.
And you have more revenue. Well, we made sure that this bill, we put a check in there to say, because a lot of counties, they do that. They say, well, there's this new pot of money and we're going to raise your millage rate.
And that's what citizens say. We gave you the penny and you said it would get rid of that tax, but here we are 5 years later and all of a sudden that part of our bill, we're starting to see tax again.
Exactly. And so now your state legislatures get to oversee that and say, if you do not, again, if you don't, and I've told the county this, I've told the cities this, if we're not offsetting the property taxes and I see that number differentiate, I will not tax my citizens more and I'll pull that 1% sales tax and you can have it all on your property. You can push it all to your millage rate and explain it to your voters.
Correct.
Why you increase those.
So there's safeguards on that to make sure that, we don't the example I always like to get, and I grew up in Florida, so way back in the 80s, it was, hey, we need to have a lottery because if we get the lottery, we can fund education. And man, if we can fund more money into education, we can have a phenomenal education system. So it won, it passed.
Absolutely.
So what happened though, years later, everybody looked at it and said, wait a minute, we're still struggling in the education system. Where's all this money going? Well, what they found is the lottery money was going to education, but the money that was allocated for education, they took it away and put it in other areas. So the citizens felt like they were deceived.
Oh, absolutely. And they are when their taxes go up and all these pet projects come along. And so that's on previous legislators and that's on the previous administrations that they didn't put safeguards in place to make sure, hey, we put this in place. This is what we intended to do. Well, now it's also on our shoulders to say, whoa, guys, we're going to have to make the hard choice and pull this back because you're not using it the way we intended to use it. And so if we have to make that hard decision, we're going to make that hard decision. And so that's why we wanted to make sure those checks and balances were in place.
That's good.
And I want to stress this specifically. I will not support any tax increases in the county. I don't think we need it. I think there are ways around that and ways that we can manage our budgets very efficiently.
And that's what the citizens want. Let's be clear on that. Nobody wants a tax increase. And I've ran on that platform as well, but I've also said that we can't predict certain things like the bad economic crash in '08 and other things.
And I hear that question a lot. So what happens if it tanks? Well, it operates like a loss. You still have that underlying millage rate. So like loss, your technical millage rate is technically like 7.5%. But because of lost, it takes half away. So it's really only 4.9%. Well, your millage rate is 4.9. And so that loss, so say, then you have that recession and it goes down. Well, now that loss is going to readjust to now your millage rate is really 6%. And so all loss is doing is offsetting that millage rate from 7.5 to 4.9. And this floss will go from that 4.9 almost to 0. And over time, it will go to 0 because, again, sales taxes grow quicker than your property taxes because they grow with the economy.
Well, that's the hope. If they pass the penny, obviously, your portion of the bill. So somebody that paid $1,000 in property taxes, it's only going to go, and you said school board 66%, just to say. So $333 of your bill would be city, county, or county, and that's the portion of your bill that go away. The school portion would still be there, but it'd be nice to lose a third of your tax bill by only paying a penny sales tax. And like many people have advocated, we're not the only ones in Catoosa County, the residents here, paying that 1 cent. We are a 75 corridor, folks. We have folks stop. We have folks from Hamilton that come shop at a Costco. So we have a lot of out-of-town money that comes in, so it's not shouldered 100% of the burden on that 1 cent. We're having everybody else chip in as well, and that's kind of nice. Okay. That's question number 1. We're not even going to go to 2 or 3. That's just going to have to be another episode because this one's the most important. These other 2 questions are on there, and I want to attack them and talk to you about them because I want everybody to be educated like I want to be when I go to vote, and I think that's important. I think that's why I started this, was to get information to the community. So, Mitchell, I appreciate you. Is there any last thing that you would want to add about what we talked about today to tell the citizens, anything we might have missed? And I don't think we did. There's a lot more, trust me, to cover.
Absolutely.
But I think it gets a little deep, and I think for right now we just needed to give a broad overview of the positive things and what this means and why it's a benefit to the citizens. And there are some concerns that'll come up as we go through.
And with every policy change, I want to be clear, there are pros and cons for every policy choice we do. My job is to protect the homeowners, to provide a plan that works tactically, but also strategically, short-term and long-term. And I think with all of these checks and balances in this bill, we've accomplished that. It's a very complicated bill, absolutely, because we wanted to have all those checks and balances. Nothing easy is simple.
Sure.
And so I think this was a fair way of attacking this problem of these runaway assessments and to, again, moving from property taxes to sales taxes. Again, we try to solve a couple of problems all in one bill. And so I hope that the people can see that our complete intention is to protect the homeowner, protect you guys, and allow equal and lower taxes.
Yeah, and I think that's it. And I think the main thing is, first, how you vote on this. It's statewide to decide yes or no. If that goes into effect, like Mitchell said, come January 1, the cities and the county and the school board have to make a decision. And if they decide and it doesn't happen where the 1 cent, this would still be in effect. I mean, there still would be this homestead exemption if it was voted statewide. So it's not all or nothing. In other words, you can't, if you don't have the penny, you can't have this. You can have this and not end up having the penny sales tax added to relieve that. But both would be nice.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people would agree on that. But here again, I think there's got to be a lot of education out there about that 1 cent.
No, absolutely.
To show folks what the benefit is, because, there's some sour taste in the mouth of folks that don't necessarily understand why taxes went up the way they did when they still voted in FLOST. And they're, like we said, they're different issues, but I think that's the piece we've got to do a good job of getting the information to the folks.
Absolutely. It's our job to communicate, but it's also our job to listen to you guys as the constituents. And so if you vote no, we'll go back to the drawing board and work on something else.
Sure. My gut tells me that this will pass. I think folks are so fatigued on the last couple of years property tax hikes that, I just don't see how that won't pass. But we'll see. That's question number 1 on your ballot. So thank you for tuning in today, and we'll be back next week, and we'll tackle 2 and 3 on here. So you've got all the information you need when you go to the ballot to make an informed decision that works best for you and our community. Until next time, thanks everybody. Enjoy your week.